All right, Panthers. So here we go. Today, these are just going to be really, really quick. This is just kind of an overview of the rise of the modern civil rights movement, beginning the mid 1950s, going through really into the 1970s. And this is really about finishing the Civil War. The Civil War, we end slavery, obviously, slavery is against law. However, lots of laws are passed after the Civil War that really still um, make African Americans, minorities, but more so African Americans, truly second class citizens. And so this is trying to finally realize the promises of the Civil War. Now, remember, I told you everything about the Cold War, everything that happens during the Cold War revolves around the Cold War, including the Civil Rights Movement. It's not any accident that the civil rights movement kind of gets kick-started again in the mid 1950s and becomes a big focus in trying to right the wrongs of discrimination and segregation because of the Cold War. The Soviet Union, after having been stopped in Central Europe and elsewhere, the Soviet Union begins going to places like Africa and Asia and Latin America and say, look, you think the United States is going to treat you well? You think the United States is your friend? You think the United States is somebody you want to ally yourselves with? Look at how they treat your people in their country. Look at how they treat people of color in their own country. You think they're going to treat you any better? And the United States realizes this is a real threat. And so the United States begins to address a lot of these problems in reaction to what the Soviet Union is saying during the Cold War, because we're trying to uh, win hearts and influence minds around the world, and it's hard to do that when we're treating um, minorities who look like them in the United States poorly. So there we go. Everything's about the Cold War during this time. All right, real quick, we got to get some background about what's happening, why things are happening. And it really kind of goes back to this case in 1892 called Plessy versus Ferguson. And this gentleman here, this fine looking gentleman you see in the picture there, his name is Homer Plessy. He is of mixed ancestry. His father is white, his mother is black. And he buys a ticket to go from New Orleans to Covington, Louisiana. So he goes and sits in the whites only rail car. He's on this train, and there's several different cars on this train. He goes to this rail car that's for whites only. Okay. Um, he's told you need to go sit in the black car, and he goes, "Well, I don't want to go sit in the black car. There's some really nice things here in the white car that the black car doesn't have, like windows and seats that aren't broken and heat and things like that." So he refuses to go. Right when they say, "Well, you're partially black," right? You're partially black. So if you're partially black, you're all black, which means you got to go to the back rail car. So Plessy refuses. He's arrested for violating this law, saying that he didn't go to the right rail car. If you're partially black, you're all black. That's the rule. Plessy is found guilty. He has to pay a fine of $25, which was a pretty hefty fine in 1892. And he appeals all the way to the 14th, all the way to the Supreme Court, claiming that his 14th Amendment right had been violated. 14th Amendment states that you are a citizen of the United States. You are entitled to all the rights and privileges of a citizen of the United States. All right, so it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rules in a 7-1 ruling that his 14th Amendment had not been violated, since it only recognized native-born people and gave them equal rights. Okay? They said that He wasn't being stopped from getting on the train. That would have been a violation of his rights. He was still being allowed to get on the train. He just had to go to a different car, right? They're not telling him you can't get on this train. They're telling him you have to go to a different part of the car. And this is where we get this notion of separate but equal. It comes out of this Supreme Court ruling. You can segregate the races as long as the facilities are equal. Okay, so this legalizes segregation in the United States, and this is where we get white bathrooms, black bathrooms, white seating areas, black seating areas, white schools, black schools, white entrances, black entrances. In places like the American Southwest, Colorado, where there's not a very large black population, it's then segregated by Mexicans, Hispanics. Mexican entrances, white entrances. Mexican schools, white schools. Mexican bathrooms, white bathrooms. Obviously, the black bathrooms or the Mexican bathrooms or the Chinese Asian bathrooms or schools were definitely of less quality. But the argument was they're equal. You've got your school, we've got our school, you've got your bathroom, we've got our bathroom. And that's in a lot of people's minds, that was equal. All right. Then comes this explosive case that really brings a lot of attention to these racial problems. 1955, this young man, Emmett Till, he's a young black man from Chicago, goes to Mississippi to visit some relatives. While he's down there on summer break visiting his relatives, they go into town and they see this 21-year-old white woman. And Emmett Till thinks she's, sexy. So he whistles at her and he says something to her. Not a good move. Not a good move in 1955 Mississippi for a young black man to be whistling or even talking to a young white woman. That night, Emmett Till disappears from his uncle's house. He was there when they went to bed. When they woke up, he was no longer there. They can't find Emmett Till anywhere until several days later, August 3rd, Emmett Till's body washes up on the banks of the Tallahatchie River. Emmett Till had been beaten to death. And in addition to being beaten to death, they took a barbed wire and they had wrapped barbed wire around his neck and then attached the other end of the barbed wire to a very large warehouse fan, like a fan you would see in a greenhouse. They had wrapped the other end of that barbed wire around that greenhouse fan and then dumped him into the Tallahatchie River. So this white woman who he had whistled at, her husband and his friend are arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Emmett Till. And this is where things get bad, y'all. You can see in the top corner there, that's Emmett Till's, or the white woman's husband and his friend. They're put on trial before an all-white jury in Mississippi. Emmett Till's lawyers say this isn't right. We should move the trial out of Mississippi, right? Because there's a lot of, they didn't think he was going to get a fair trial in Mississippi. And they protested an all-white jury, but they said this all-white jury is this man and his friends' peers. Oh boy. They're found not guilty of kidnapping or of murder. The following day, this man and his friend gave an interview to a magazine in which they admitted they had killed Emmett Till, right? They've already been found not guilty. According to the Constitution, you can't be charged with the same crime twice. If you're found guilty or found innocent of a crime one time, you can't be charged with it a second time, even if you admit to it. So now they've already been found innocent, not guilty. And they admit that they killed Emmett Till and that Emmett Till had it coming. And they laughed about how Emmett Till begged for his life as they beat him. When the man was asked why he killed Emmett Till, he said, "What else could I do?" He thought he was as good as a white man, so he needed to be taught a lesson. So Emmett Till's mother holds a funeral, and it's an open casket funeral, and she invites the media to come to the funeral and take pictures of Emmett Till in his casket, so the world could see what she said, quote, what the world could see what they did to my boy. And then these pictures ran in newspapers across the country. And here's what they did to her boy. Ugh. So that calls a lot of attention to the racial inequities and racial problems in Mississippi. And it begins to convince people we've got to address this. This is not right that this is happening in 1955 America. And also there is the Cold War component because the United States is really getting hammered around the world by the Soviets about our civil rights abuses. Now, to be sure, Soviet Union did not clean itself, right? They don't have a lot of minorities in racial minorities in the Soviet Union, but they have a lot of religious and a lot of political minorities who are not treated well. But Soviet Union hammers this on our treatment of racial minorities in the United States. One of the big moments comes in the civil rights movement. One of the really big moments in the civil rights movement comes in the segregation of schools. That's one of the big landmark moments in the civil rights movement is desegregation of schools. And it really begins in a different part of the country at a different time dealing with a different minority. In 1946, the Menendez family in San Diego tried to enroll their children in the school that was directly across the street from their house. They could see this school directly across the street. They could look out their front window and they could see this school. So they went there to enroll their children. The school said, "Oh, no. Your children can't go here. They have to go to the Mexican school." Okay. The reason that the Menendez children were denied admission was because they were Hispanic. And there was fears that they simply didn't know enough English, that they wouldn't be able to converse with other students or be able to understand what was going on in the classroom because they couldn't speak English. Well, they could speak English, and they spoke English very well. So the Menendez family sued. It was all the way to the California Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of the Menendez family. And this ends racially segregated schools in California. Southern California schools were segregated by Mexican whites. Northern California, they were segregated by Chinese whites or Asians whites. In some cases, it was just all-encompassing Asian. So this ends racially segregated schools. You can no longer have schools for whites and schools for another ethnicity or race. Now, California had a brand new governor at this time. His name was Earl Warren. This is important because in 1954, Eisenhower is going to appoint Earl Warren to the United States Supreme Court. He's going to be the Chief Justice, so he's going to be in charge of the United States Supreme Court. He's governor of California when the Menendez case is ruled, outlawing racially, ethnically segregated schools. He's now going to be in charge of the United States Supreme Court in 1954. Guess what happens in 1954? Probably the single most important case in the last 150 years. Brown v. Board of Education. Your life as you know it right this second, your life as you've known it for the last 10 years, 11 years of your life happened because of this one ruling. 1951, Oliver Brown, who you can see in the top photograph there, tries to enroll his daughters in the school closest to their home. He lives in Topeka, Kansas. He wants his kids to go to the neighborhood school. However, he's told, your girls can't come here because this is a white school and you're not. Your school, your daughters have to go to the black school, which was a long ways away from their house. He goes, that's not even close. And they said, well, that's not our problem, right? This school is for whites only. Mendez or Brown, Mr. Brown didn't want his girls to go to the black school for lots of different reasons. One, it was a long ways away. The girls would have to cross 2 sets of railroad tracks, and it was definitely inferior to the white school. You can see in the bottom photograph there, that was a typical black school. That's an all black school. That's one classroom with all those kids in there. And very often the teachers were not adequately trained. They were not very good teachers. Textbooks, they didn't have enough textbooks. If they had textbooks at all, a lot of times they were outdated. They were falling apart and didn't have heat. Windows were broken. Water didn't run. It was just inferior in so many ways to the white school. And Mr. Brown says, my girls are just as good as white kids. They should be allowed to go to the white school. So he sues Topeka School District. Again, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. A lawyer from the NAACP, his name is Thurgood Marshall, represents the Browns and then 11 other families who have similar complaints signed in on the lawsuit. Thurgood Marshall, by the way, will become the first African American to serve on the Supreme Court. He will be appointed to the Supreme Court by Lyndon Johnson in about 10 years and become the first African American on the Supreme Court. Thurgood Marshall represents the Browns and several other families in this court case. Supreme Court rules unanimously in favor of the Browns. The Chief Justice, this is his first case after becoming Chief Justice, Earl Warren, who was the governor of California, remember, with the Mendez case. All he does is he takes the Mendez ruling from California and applies it to the Brown case. And then he adds on, separate is never and can never be equal. The name implies separate, meaning unequal. So he desegregates the school. This ruling desegregates the schools. Segregation is now illegal across the country based on race or ethnicity. And so the people that you go to school with, the schools that you go to school at, now and in your entire life, all come back to this one court ruling. Forever changes the landscape of the United States. Now, it's going to take a long time for this ruling to be fully enforced, and there's going to be a lot of pushback on it. But this is kind of the beginning of getting the wheels going in the modern civil rights movement. All right, Panthers, here we go.